They have no control over anything. They can't do anything with the business operations. They can't tell the general partners, here's what you're going to do. No ability to sell their interests. So we're going to be talking about family limited partnerships. This is probably one of the most misunderstood of the corporate formations that are out there. And there's an awful lot of, I don't want to say misunderstanding, but a lot of apprehension around using family limited partnerships because a little more than several years back, there were a lot of attorneys and accountants and businesses that were really getting hammered by the IRS, but it was because people were taking huge discounts that they shouldn't have been taking, and they weren't backing it up. And then the response was, oh, we can't use these family limited partnerships because the IRS is going to come down on us. Well, that's like saying no one should ever go to a hospital because they had a bad infection rate. It's like, no, you should still go to hospitals. Just make sure everything is properly cleaned and sanitized. So as long as you're staying and coloring within the lines with family limited partnerships, it can be a very effective tool in the right circumstances. All right, so. Yes, I am Jeffrey G. Marsacci, the plain English attorney. That is a registered trademark, so I was very happy to get that about a year or two ago. This is applying to all of my online books and everything like that. So I've been doing legal work for 29 years, which doesn't seem possible. Of course, just looking at me, you know I started practicing law at 7. I'm also a certified Medicaid planner, author of 10 plus books. Honestly, I'm not even keeping track because now I'm doing a lot more courses. My whole policy on writing a book was if I had to explain the same thing to 3 different clients in the same week and that explanation took more than 20 minutes, it's time to write a book about it so I can just hand it to them, keeping everything efficient. And a lot of those same topics are now online as courses, and there are some free webinars at plainenglishattorney.com. So, all right, so what exactly are family limited partnerships? Family limited partnerships are just limited partnerships. It's a corporate formation. That whole family thing kind of got tacked onto the beginning of it because a lot of family businesses that had and grew, say, into multiple locations or multiple types of businesses, they wanted everything kept within the family, but at the same time, they wanted to make sure they were passing things on to the next generation with as little taxes as possible. So this formation is really used to own other businesses. And it's layered corporate protection. So one entity is kind of controlling the other businesses. So, like I do with a lot of my client processes when I'm doing estate planning, I walk through, okay, here's the first step. We'll get to the second step when we get to that step. And then there's the third step. So we're gonna walk along to make sure that this is just as easy to understand as possible and not throwing all of the complication right on top of things. Any questions before we begin? Anything I should specifically look to address? Is everybody still kind of getting that coffee going and waking up? That's fine. All right. So what are the elements of the family limited partnership? Well, you have general partnership interests. That's the control within that family limited partnership corporate formation. Then there are limited partnership interests. We're going to go into a description of each one of those. And then you have your business assets. So a lot of my clients may have a couple of rental properties. Maybe they have another small business or some other type of corporation. Some of these are in LLCs, some of these are in corporations. And I sometimes hear, oh, let's just go ahead and put the investments in cash and other stuff in there. And it's kind of like they're treating this as if it were almost a substitute for their revocable living trust. And it's no, this is strictly for your business stuff. So why do people look at the family limited partnership?
If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel.
Essentially, they want to reduce their taxable estate. So they want to make sure that they're not getting some type of 40% hit, especially if it's family businesses. They don't want to put their heirs in the position of having to sell off assets just to pay taxes. They're open to transferring business shares to the next generation, but they don't want to give up control. So if you think about this as like the grandparents owning all of these businesses, they're okay with transferring some shares and interests down to the next generation or even to the grandkids. But they don't want to give up that control of running everything because they've been very successful in doing that. All right, so this is a way to do it. And a lot of times the grandparents may not be willing to give up the profits, the overall profits of this business, And so that really does push this into here's how we can do it with a family limited partnership if we're doing it the right way. So those are really the big elements that we're dealing with. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the general partnership shares. The general partnership shares, they control everything. 100% authority, complete control over the business operations inside that family limited partnership. The other thing is general partners are liable and personally liable for the business actions in the family limited partnership. So all the authority, all the responsibility, all the liability. And so distributions from the family limited partnership, it's not that they just go to the general partners, they go to the overall partners. So you've probably heard and understand that there are partnerships out there, and occasionally it's like, oh yeah, me and Ted here, we're running everything, but here's our silent partner, Barbara. What exactly does that mean, silent partner? It's like they're not actively engaged. With the family limited partnership, that loose quote, silent partners are really the limited partnership share owners. So in setting this up, what are the documents that we need? Well, you need to have your initial filing. So if you're thinking about setting up a corporation, you've got to send your articles of incorporation into the Secretary of State or whatever your state has to set up the entity. For family limited partnerships, in North Carolina, and it's probably something similar, it's a certificate of limited partnership. So it gets that same initial filing saying, hey, we are setting up this corporate formation and it's a limited partnership. Then, just like with a corporation, you have your bylaws. With an LLC, you have your operating agreement. The family limited partnership is going to have its partnership agreement or subscription agreement. There are several other terms, but essentially it's here's how we're running things. So you need that documentation. And that really does describe here's what happens with the general partnership interests and here's how they're in charge. And again, consistent with law, they're liable and responsible for everything. And it also provides the process if we're bringing in any new partners, here's how it has to work. Right, so now the limited partnership shares, they have no control over anything. So it's one or more limited partners. They can't do anything with the business operations. They can't tell the general partners, here's what you're going to do, they can always say, here's what we want you to do, and they can get completely ignored. No ability to sell their interests. So it's very typical in these agreements, the subscription agreement. Yeah, you're getting this interest, but you can't sell it. You can't use it as collateral for a loan. You can't gift this to anyone. It's yours. Now, transferring can happen with the blessing of the general partners, but generally speaking, they're not doing that. There's no personal liability for these limited shareholders. And, well, the distributions are according to the overall ownership interest. So, all right, if the whole overall family limited partnership has profits that they're distributing, well, they're going to get their percentage interest. That really doesn't sound like it's an awful lot of a benefit, does it? How many Star Trek fans do we have out there? Okay, do you remember Star Trek Voyager? All right, there was this character, Harry Kim. He was an ensign, the very starting level of the officers in Star Trek, and he was on this ship that was kind of lost far away, and they were always trying to get back home for 7 years, and he still stayed an ensign. Well, I think it was somewhere around season 3, all the actors were trying to negotiate their contracts, try to get more money because they were making more money for the company. They actually offered to give his character a promotion in lieu of giving him extra money. That's not a real benefit. Well, that's kind of reminded me of what kind of benefit do you actually get for these limited partnership shares. Yeah, you get your share of the profits if it's declared, but only the general partners get to say if you have profits, so you're just holding on to this. So that's not going to be all that much. Let's talk a little bit about what are the values of those shares. All right, let's just say this is a $10 million. If you evaluate all of the assets inside the family limited partnership, it's worth $10 million. If you own a 1% limited share, 1% of 10 million, that's 100,000. Is that share worth 100,000 if there's no control, no ability to sell, no ability to gift? You can't force the distributions out. Is that really worth 100,000? No. That's where we get into these discounted values. We're going to talk more about the gifting out and giving a quote unquote the percentage of the assets getting to the next generation, but you don't value the assets you value the shares. And with all of these restrictions, it's going to be a lot less than that $100,000 for gifting purposes. All right, so what assets go into a family limited partnership? It's only business assets. So these business assets are rental property. For whatever reason, I picked an ice cream shop. Those are going into the family limited partnership, but very typically, each one of those business entities is going to have its own corporate structure, kind of running as an independent business, yet it's owned and subject to that overall family limited partnership. So if you end up talking with a client and they're always trying to find some clever loophole that they imagine no one else has ever come up with, well, wait a minute. Why can't I take my personal investments and move this into the family limited partnership, and now I can gift these personal investments down to the next generation, but still keep all the control over it? That's going to be discounted for estate tax purposes too. Now, well, there are two big problems with something like that. One, because it's not in business, it may blow up the whole limited partnership entity. And two, is $1 million in stocks really discounted to say 700,000 just because it's inside the structure? Or look, is cash? That's basically it. So you're not going to get much of a deduction even if you put it in there anyway.